Now, I just want to ask you a pretty straightforward question, really, because we know that the US has announced only in recent days that it is losing patience with all of this and is prepared to walk away. And when questioned yesterday about his Secretary of State's comments, this is Marco Rubio, rather, about patience for a permanent ceasefire waning, President Trump had this to say.
If for some reason one of the two parties makes it very difficult, we're just going to say you're foolish, you're fools, you're horrible people, and we're going to just take a pass.
We're just going to take a pass. Very, very clear from Donald Trump, and I don't even think he'd started playing golf at that particular point. Very, very clear indeed. So look, I want to ask you this question, because the Ukrainians were put under a lot of pressure in the last few weeks with the withdrawal of military support and intelligence sharing to Ukraine by the US. They came to the table. They said that they were prepared to look towards an unconditional or towards a ceasefire plan of some kind. Russia dismissed that outright, didn't agree to it at all. And in the meantime, the US is losing patience with the Europeans for continually backing and backstopping Ukraine on the one hand, but also potentially losing patience with Russia because we know that Donald Trump wanted to end this within 24 hours. Then it became 100 days. And it's looking like the great deal maker may fail in this messy, protracted and difficult peacemaking process, if indeed you can even call it a peacemaking process, because to have a process of any kind, it requires both parties to genuinely want peace. And I've got this to ask you. If Russia doesn't want peace and the US walks away, what next for Ukraine? If Russia doesn't want peace and the US walks away, what next for Ukraine? 0345 6060 973, text 84850. Ask Alexa to send a comment to LBC. Or if you want a more blunt way of me asking that question, let me put it to you more directly. Is Russia rattled, which is why it's announced this 30-hour truce, or is it simply game playing the West? 0345 6060 973. Now, Zelenskyy has effectively obviously denounced the fact that these attacks were ongoing. And he noted that in March, after talks with the US, Kyiv agreed to a 30-day immediate ceasefire, a proposal that was rejected outright by the Kremlin. And he said this: 30 hours is enough to make headlines, but not for genuine confidence-building measures. 30 days could give peace a chance, right? So Zelensky's throwing the gauntlet down now to Putin on this. And a Ukrainian officer in the eastern Donetsk region, speaking an hour after the ceasefire was scheduled, saw no immediate sign that Russian forces intended to lay down their arms. And I quote, "They're shooting and artillery is working like it always works," he said. "Assault operations are continuing. What kind of ceasefire is this?" And the Russian president, saying that the Easter truce was guided by humanitarian considerations and would last 30 hours, said the following: "I order all military actions to cease for this period." And he said this in a televised meeting in the Kremlin with Russia's top general, Valery Gerasimov, and his comments came after President Trump threatened to walk away from peace talks unless there were immediate signs of progress. "We assume that the Ukrainian side will follow our example," said Putin. Now, Lisa Yasko, a member of the Ukrainian parliament, said the capital endured an hour-long attack from drones after Putin's announcement. "A ceasefire for one day, even if it happens, is a joke. We need a real ceasefire with real conditions met by Putin." Look, I want to take a step back on this and just assess where we are right now, because there's an interesting piece in the Telegraph today by Colonel Richard Kemp, former British Army officer, entitled "Putin's Truce Shows That Stick is Better Than Carrot with Him." And this is something that the White House and President Trump may begin to realize. The question is, does the US really care, and what's it going to do about it? And Colonel Kemp argues in this piece as follows: the Russian economy is in dire straits and Moscow needs a lengthy pause in hostilities to begin to rebuild it. What is more, Russia can ill afford the stronger sanctions that are currently under discussion between the US and European countries, with further talks expected in London next week. Now, he's also saying, and that's fine if you take it at face value, he's also saying, Colonel Kemp, in his piece in the Telegraph today, Putin has recently lost significant influence in the Middle East. With the fall of Assad's regime in Syria, Putin can ill afford to lose any more clout. Worse, he doesn't know what Trump is going to do about Iran, with which Russia has a strategic partnership, resulting, amongst other things, in a ready supply of drones and other weapons for the war in Ukraine. Now, this is quite interesting because the US is having a second of its talks with Iran. We'll see where that goes. But Kemp is suggesting here that Russian influence over Iran may be waning. Its economy is on its knees as well. We've heard that for a long time, though, haven't we? I mean, we've heard that from the beginning, that these sanctions are really going to bite. Can't really see much of it, can you? I mean, they're still shelling at will. They're still recruiting people, pulling them out of gyms, apparently, to go and serve on the front line. Putin's got a completely different risk appetite to the West when it comes to this war. But I tell you this is very, very interesting. In the Financial Times today, when you're thinking about what now Europe particularly is going to do if the US does indeed step away, as it is threatening to do, because we know that the attention span of the US government is quite limited on this and has been for quite some time. And no one's going to forget that dressing down that Zelenskyy got in the White House. Financial Times today, Hungary would hurt EU taxpayers by lifting Russia sanctions, warns Estonia. Chuck this into the mix. Hungary's Viktor Orban will lump European taxpayers with an even bigger bill for support to Ukraine if he forces the EU to lift restrictions on the 210 billion euros of frozen assets, according to Estonia's foreign minister. This is Markus Tashkna, who told the Financial Times that blocking the renewal of EU sanctions, a threat that Orban has repeatedly made, and we know that Viktor Orban is quite partial to Russia, would leave G7 and EU governments on the hook for multi-billion euro loans that have been made to Kyiv that were backed by Russian assets. So what you basically got here is the fact that the EU and the G7, which includes, of course, US, Canada, Japan, and France, Italy, Germany, and the UK, last year used profits arising from about 260 billion of frozen assets worldwide to underpin a 50 billion euro loan to Ukraine. Now, if those assets are unfrozen, there goes your collateral for your loan, right? I mean, you're going to have to then wear that 50 billion yourself if you unfreeze these assets. At the moment, they're frozen. There is some talk about whether they should actually be confiscated, whether we should be playing hardball with the Russians and we should actually confiscate their assets completely. So that's another thing to bear in mind here, that Europe's not exactly united either in terms of what it's going to do. Yes, I know that the French and the British are talking about this kind of mutual force that is going to... What exactly is it going to do? 30, 40,000 troops. At most, act as a tripwire. Nothing more. Act as a tripwire in Ukraine is what it's going to do. Now, I tell you this. Radek Sikorski, Poland's foreign minister, said Mr. Trump's team should realise that the Kremlin was mocking their goodwill. That, my friends, is before the 30-hour truce was announced and, according to the Ukrainians, is being transgressed. This is in The Economist. Is quoted in The Economist newspaper. Trump's Ukraine ceasefire is slipping away. This is Sikorski, who I heard at Ditchley in Oxfordshire, a year and a half ago, something like that, who was even then stating so clearly that Europe and the West needed to wake up to the threat of Putin. So look, it's now getting quite acute, this situation, because if the US does indeed walk away, and it's said very openly that its patience is wearing thin, right, number one. Number two, if Putin is in this really for the long game, really for the long haul, and is calling the West bluff and wants to continue with this war, and I can't particularly understand why, because he's made some gains, would it not be better to just call a truce now and try and keep what you have? But it's up to him. No one could read his mind. If you've got that going on, And thirdly, if you've got a situation where European countries, and this is going to have to be European countries, this is going to have to be enforced by a non-NATO force, can't understand or agree on what their own strategy is going to be in terms of troops. And even Kaja Kallas, the EU's High Representative on Foreign Affairs, is not clear exactly what role the troops are going to play. And you've got Viktor Orban threatening to lift sanctions on Russia. Where does that leave you? Where does that leave this whole situation? If Russia doesn't want peace and the US walks away, what next for Ukraine? Peter in Carlisle, good afternoon.
Hello. Good afternoon to you too, sir.
Happy Easter,
by the way.
Happy Easter to you too, sir. What would you like to say?
Don't listen to a word that Putin says. Judge him by his actions.
Fair point. Where does it? Yeah, go on.
There are several quotations about that, like, yeah, you'll know your fruits. That sort of thing from the Bible. Yep. Anyway, the man cannot be trusted. It's simply just, I don't know what he's doing, but it's certain that if Putin wins in, the war he's fighting now, he's going to go further. And eventually he's going to come right into Europe. And eventually, if he gets his way enough, he's going to go, he'll affect America.
You see, I'm not sure it will affect America necessarily, and this is exactly what Zelenskyy said in the White House when he got a complete dressing down. I'm not exactly sure that America sees itself in the way it may have done until January when the new president came in for the second time. I'm not sure America's bothered at all, quite frankly, and nor do I believe that Russia is going to march on Western Europe. I mean, it might go and take Ukraine. I don't think it's going to go and take Poland because Poland's a NATO state, but I do think it wants to protect its near abroad. Peter, if Putin cannot be trusted, what should the response be? Because the US has basically said that the clock's ticking.
Yeah, I agree with him 100% on that. What NATO needs to do is to build up their armed forces. To get peace, prepare for war. If your enemy is going to punch you in the mouth, you don't touch him, do you?
Explain what you mean.
Simple. If your enemy is stronger than you, you don't attack him.
Okay, but who's attacked who here? I mean, this is the argument that Trump has made to Zelenskyy, that you don't start a war with someone who's 20 times your size. But the reality is that Zelenskyy didn't start the war, did he?
Start the war. Zelenskyy didn't start the war. The tanks rushed into Ukraine. Zelenskyy didn't do anything to start a war.
So where does this leave us? If Zelenskyy didn't start the war, but Trump is effectively saying that persistently that he did, and that you don't pick a fight with someone 20 times your size.
Wrong on this.
Okay, but he may be wrong. Peter, he may be wrong, but you and I can pontificate
Look at the footage that's there. Look at the footage.
I'm not arguing with you about this, Peter. What I'm saying is Trump may be wrong, but where does that leave the West?
The West has to beef up.
Go on.
It's as simple as that. The West has to beef up so that they cannot be threatened, and we can protect our neighbours.
Okay, so would that mean that non-US, take the US out of the equation because I don't think they can be relied on at all. You're saying what? That European states need to step up what exactly? Their defence spending, their armaments, their military, what?
All of it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we shall see. Go on, Peter.
If an enemy comes and approaches one of our neighbours who's not actually necessarily part of Europe, we can actually put feet on the ground and say, sod off.
Well, you see, I wish we had enough troops to say sod off and put feet in the ground, to quote your language, by the way. They've only got 30 to 40,000 that can be deployed. I mean, that's not enough to say boo to a goose. Peter, thank you for your call. Lisa in Islington, good afternoon.
Oh, hello. The West, Europe and the US have been doing their best to support Ukraine for 3 years, and it hasn't worked. Most military analysts believe that Russia has already won, inverted commas. So when we talk about peace talks and Russia doesn't want peace, we don't define the word peace. what does peace mean for Zelenskyy? Zelenskyy, peace means, which was obvious in a lot of his pronouncements, that everything goes back to 1991. All these provinces that have joined Russia would have to go back to Ukraine. Crimea goes back. I mean, if Russia is winning despite all these efforts by the West, why should Russia want this kind of peace where they lose all the gains they've got? Well, if they are the winners, Zelenskyy cannot. He cannot say, because if you don't do this, then you don't want peace. That's not true.
Okay, let me ask you this, Lisa. You're saying that Russia's winning.
Yes.
Well, it might be partially winning, but it didn't march in and take Ukraine in 2 weeks, which is what we think they thought they could do.
Well, some military analysts like Daniel Davis and all these, they believe that Russia is doing it slowly to preserve their fighting men.
Preserve their fighting
also,
men? Are you being serious, Lisa?
Yeah,
preserve their fighting men?
There were bodies exchanged between Ukraine and Russia. There were 950 Ukrainian bodies and only about 45 Russians, something like that.
How many Russians do you think have died in this war, Lisa?
Well, we don't, I don't know exactly, but it's...
Well, have a guess.
Not true. The West
have a guess.
Has got I don't know.
Probably hundreds of thousands. Probably. I don't know.
Probably.
I mean, well, yeah, right. So,
Ukraine has lost more people.
It may have. We don't know. I mean, this is a war, right? So there's propaganda on both sides, and we're never going to know the exact figures. It's a war.
We only hear the propaganda on our mainstream media. There's a lot of people who are more expert than that, and they say that Putin is looking after his army. He doesn't want to lose them all. And also, when Zelenskyy claims that Russia targets civilians, is actually not true. Russia has never targeted civilians, and a lot of people agree to that. And just to say...
So hang on a second. So hold on. Are you saying that these two Russian missile attacks in the sound of Sumy killing 34 people, many of them gathering to attend Palm Sunday services, was not an attack on civilians?
This was not true. This was a gathering on that Sunday, gathering of some kind of battalion. I don't know. It's to do with the military and
How do you know,
MPs
Lisa?
from that region.
How do you know?
Because they were actually. I even saw an MP from that area saying it was so stupid.
Okay, well, we can't verify that. That's your view. Lisa, tell me this.
No, it's not my view.
Well, it is because I'm quoting to you. No, it is your view because you can't verify it, can you? You can only
How can I verify it to you now?
Well, nor can I. So, okay, fine. Let's agree a truce. Let's agree a truce on that.
Is your truth better than mine? Your point of view.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not Meghan Markle. I don't proclaim that my truth is better than anyone else's. Not that she said that, but we remember the interview with Oprah Winfrey.
Lot of generals from there's Daniel Davis deep dive and another general that
Lisa, let me steer you to what should be done now. Tell me what should be done now. What should the West do?
What should the West do? What has the West done so far? I mean, just put more money. And these military analysts, they think whatever you do, you can't do anything.
Okay, Lisa, thank you for your call. Beryl in Wisbech. Good afternoon.
Hi, Ali. Lisa, she really doesn't know what she's talking about. Russia's not winning this war. Russia's totally failed to achieve any of its goals. I remember Putin not wanting to be humiliated. Well, he's humiliated himself, his country, and his military. Now, as for Lisa, Ukraine is actually pushing back in Luhansk, in Donetsk, Zaporizhia and Kherson. The Skala Regiment is doing a brilliant job at Pokrovsk, where Putin demanded that his army take it by the 31st of January, any target that they're giving in that military, that Russian military, they never hit any targets whatsoever. The 3rd Assault Brigade doing brilliant work up in Luhansk, Azov in Donetsk, brilliant work they're doing, and Russia is achieving nothing. Now, you have this issue about the security of Russia, that Russia's worried about their security, and we've had discussions before about NATO going eastbound. Now, they are the second, or was the second biggest army and military in the world. They're the biggest country in the world. If Putin was so worried about his security, he loved that Berlin Wall. All he needed to do was build a wall. Yeah? Now, I want to point out something. You need to see the whole picture here. What's happening at the moment, Russia is actually given Belarus and Belarus vice versa the right to vote in each other's countries. What is going on there? And also, Belarus has just had the Pakistani Prime Minister there. They've invited 150,000 Pakistanis into Belarus, saying it's because they need them for the work. But we've got to remember that Russia and Belarus facilitated all those foreigners coming and trying to push their way into the EU.
No, that's right.
And Poland had to build that massive fence.
That is a tool. That is being used as a tool in this war. Beryl, let me ask you, because you're very well versed on the military aspects of it, as you always are. Let me ask you this. Given where we are now, since the last time you and I spoke about this, it's looking worse and worse and worse from the US perspective, because they look like they want to wash their hands of it and move on to other things. Now, if that happens, where does that leave the EU? Because we know that the French and the British are prepared to put troops on the ground, but hardly any to make much of a difference. And we also know that the whole country in Ukraine might be zoned in terms of military on the ground. There might be Ukraine in the middle.
No, that's never going to work. That's all just a nonsense. It's just like a nonsense of sort of having troops all the way around the border, because you've not just got the Russian-Ukraine border, you've got the Belarusian border, which people all seem to be forgetting about, because that's where, when the war started, they all came in, all the tanks, that 40-mile line of tanks trying to get into Kyiv.
So what do we do, Beryl? What do we do?
I'm listening to all these analysts, and they're just not getting it right. And sectioning off parts, no. I mean, Ukraine now is producing 40% of the weaponry that they need. Rheinmetall have actually opened factories there in Ukraine.
Yep.
All this stuff takes time. Ukrainians need to keep holding on. They're not asked for foreign troops on the ground. What they're asking for is defence. And yes, it's going to be a big problem, the Americans pulling back, because of the Patriot missiles and that. And it's going to cause absolute death and destruction.
Okay.
But at the end of the day, that lady, Lisa, saying about Russia doesn't target civilians, what an absolute lie.
Okay.
I watched that, Sumi, and I watched the TV attacks as well. It was despicable. They actually, Sumi, they sent in the first missile, then they waited until people were coming out to help to rescue them, then they sent in the second missile. And this is all recorded on dash cams, in shops and everything.
Well, you've made the point. You're gone, Beryl. Finish your point.
Yeah, and also, no, go on.
No, it's fine. Beryl, I totally understand. What you're saying is the Ukrainians want to do it themselves. They are actually, their drone technology is very advanced now. They're basically saying they want to do it on their own, just give them the resources to do the job.
Yeah, exactly.
And that comes back to the point that Aline was making, which is we need to get serious if we're talking about it, to actually give them the resources they need. Beryl, thank you. Simon in Basingtstoke, afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ali. I'm afraid I'm going to have to disagree with your previous caller. If America withdraws, it's not going to just stop the supply of money and ammunition and arms. It's also going to stop the provision of what's called ISR, which is basically the ability to see what's happening on the other side of the battlefield. And that's what makes this war so different. You don't see, if you ever watch any footage, it's very rare for you to see more than 4 or 5 men at any one time. It's an empty battlefield, because if you're seen, you can be targeted. If you can be targeted, you can be killed. And Europe does not have those capabilities to provide Ukraine, even if we wanted to. We don't have the satellites, we don't have the drones, we don't have the airborne elite aircraft. We don't have any of these capabilities to provide.
So then it's game over if the US walks away.
I think it's game over if the US stays, because I think the US has proven many of the wonder weapons that the US were deploying, they're effective for 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, and then Russians develop countermeasures. It's always a big mistake to underestimate your enemy. And the fact is that Russia had loads of factories that were producing artillery shells at 10% of the rate. The fact is that the West is not in a position to fight Russia. And if we're not in a position to fight Russia, don't you think the Americans have been terrified by this? Because if they can't supply their proxy fighting Russia, how the hell are they going to fight the Chinese, which has 20 times the industrial capacity?
Well, it might not be. It's not that they don't want to. It's that they've limited the supply of weapons to Ukraine, and we know how difficult it was to get Biden's package through Congress. It took months to get it through. Simon, if the US now walks away, I mean, what then happens? Because the Russians at the moment, I mean, have announced a 30-hour truce, and apparently, according to the Ukrainians, are breaking it. So what then happens? I mean, we just sit back and let the Russians continue? I mean, what's the plan?
Well, I would suggest that it's better to make peace while you still have an army in the field and you are still fighting, and the Russians will still have to consider, if we continue the war, we might lose another 100,000 men.
But he doesn't seem to care at the moment, does he? I mean, he's not coming to the peace table. Ukraine's ready to come to the table, because particularly after the intelligence sharing was removed from the US, within no time at all they were prepared to, but the Russians aren't.
But Russia will not accept. They will not accept Ukraine being part of NATO. That's the main reason. That's the main issue of this war.
That is true. That is true.
The second thing is deploying peace enforcers, or whatever ridiculous name Keir Starmer gives them. The Russians won't. Why would they have fought a war for 3 years to prevent Ukraine being part of NATO and then allow NATO peacekeeping troops into Ukraine? Well, it's a nonsense.
That is also a very good point. I mean, if it was zoned where you had Russian troops in the east of the country, the Ukrainians in the middle, and the UK and French in the west, maybe that could be something. But I agree, it's going to be very, very thorny and difficult, and it's going to be made even more difficult if one major party that's got leverage in this walks away from the table, i.e. the US. Simon, thank you.